So welcome to today's Can Connect Forum, Increasing Accessibility with Assistive Technology. I'm Boris Vukovic. I'm the Director of the National Office of the Canadian Accessibility Network and the Research Faculty in the School of Industrial Design. For anyone who may benefit or may care about my visual description, I have a pasty face, terrible hair, and a black shirt. I'm joining you from Carleton University in Ottawa, from a really beautiful campus that is situated on the land of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe peoples, unceded and unsurrendered territory. I hope we all have taken time or will take time to learn more about why we make these land acknowledgements so they don't become just another ceremonial formality. A few housekeeping items to share with you before the panel starts. The Canadian Accessibility Network is a bilingual network. The event, however, will be delivered in English and will be providing captioning both English and French, as well as ASL interpretation throughout today's event. There are two ways to view the live transcript. The first way is to enable subtitles within Zoom. So you can do this by clicking on the arrow next to the CC button at the bottom of the screen, then click View Subtitles or View Full Transcript. The second way is through an external link, which I believe will be posted. We'll be sharing two stream links in the chat that will open up in a separate window with the full transcript. There's one link for the English transcript and one link for the French transcript, so you can follow along in your preferred language. If you cannot see the captions or encounter any other technical issues during the session, please put a comment in the chat and a member of our event support team will help you troubleshoot. And please feel free to share any relevant resources in the chat during the session. This session has been organized in collaboration with Distinctability, one of our CAN collaborator organizations. Thank you, Distinctability team, by the way. I'd like to now introduce our moderator and the panelists. Our moderator today is David Banes. David is a global accessibility and assistive technology expert, as well as an assistive technology consultant with Distinctability and with his own company, DB Access and Inclusion Services. Also, I'd like to welcome our expert panelists. Dorothy Muir is the National Engagement Manager at Brain in Hand. Brian Foster is the National Program Manager of Resource and Policy Development at Ready, Willing, and Able. Robin Lonche is an Account Manager at Fit First Technologies. And Ingrid Mushta is the Director of Special Projects and Innovation at the Ontario Disability Employment Network, or ODEN. Thank you all for sharing your time and expertise with us today. We look forward to the discussion. David, over to you, please.
Thank you very much, Boris. It's very kind. And thank you. It's very nice to meet everybody. As was suggested, I'm here in the UK at the moment, but it's a great pleasure to meet up with you. In terms of description, I think I had my 2-year-old granddaughter here with me for the weekend, and television was on. She was watching a cartoon, and Santa Claus appeared on the screen, to which she shouted out loudly, "Granddad!" And that's probably about as close to a good description of me as you're going to get. It is really interesting to do this workshop with you, with our panelists. I've worked in the area of accessibility and assistive technology for the best part of 40 years. But I think that in the last few years, and certainly over the last 5 to 10 years, we've witnessed a significant shift and an acceleration of the demand and need to increase accessibility in the workplace and in the full range of educational settings. We've seen far more activity to support the development of formal policies and employment standards for people to meet. Since the onset of the pandemic, we've really seen those shifts and trends, not only in terms of access, but in the importance and centrality of technology, accelerate even further and as employers, schools, and far many other organizations have to innovate, they have to explore ways of integrating technology into the workplace and to find solutions that will provide the tools and the support for employees or students with disabilities, including increasingly some of those with mental health support needs. And that pervasiveness of technology really goes right across every stage of our journey in education or in employment. Technology supports from the very first stages in recruitment, as we see more and more CVs being submitted online. We see that as we deliver on training to our employees, including induction, that online courses are often the way in which that's done. We collaborate and cooperate online. We fill out timesheets and so on. And we really see that support to people with disabilities is at the heart of much of what's being done in skills development, job coaching, mentoring, all are being delivered remotely. But the types of technology that are available to us are becoming more and more diverse. And the way in which we as employers and as colleges, universities, and schools respond means that we have to start thinking about what we can make available to anticipate needs. And this means thinking about the escalation of accommodations and accommodations through technology. So as we go into our discussions today, I'm going to touch upon this and look at this in a little bit more detail. So in terms of escalation, I often refer to that we start by making sure that everyone knows what technology, what access features are built into the devices they own today. Whether it's a computer, a tablet, or a mobile phone, many needs are accommodated through the technology that we already own. And that includes productivity tools and so on. And then there are a number of add-ons to that, which are free or low cost, and which often benefit every employee, but have significant benefits for some of those with disabilities. A really good example of a product would be something like Grammarly, which is designed to help anybody to write long text reports, essays more readily, but has particular advantages for people with dyslexia. And then, of course, we have our final set, the ones which I would call more the traditional assistive technologies, designed specifically to address the needs of one or more groups of people with disabilities. And with that background in mind, I wonder if you want to turn to our panel and open discussion around some of these themes. I'm going to encourage our panelists to respond to each other as well by putting up their hands as we go on. But let's just start. Let me turn to Brian first of all. Brian, in your experience, do you see that shift towards increased access and inclusion of people with disabilities happening in the workplace? You're muted, Brian.
Can you hear me now?
Well, that sounds good.
That's good. Okay. Yeah, we are noticing it, and we're noticing that the number of things that are driving that sort of move into a more conscious wrestling with accessibility and inclusion, that the diversity of those things is growing. There's a few things in the Canadian context that we're really aware of at Ready, Willing, and Able. One of the big ones is the drive around accessibility legislation at the provincial and federal level. It's driving a lot of the conversations with provincially and federally regulated employers. But then there's the things that are sort of more economic side, which, as you alluded to, David, like the shifts in the labor market. There's been a significant tightening of the labor market, particularly in the Canadian context. We're adding 800,000 immigrants a year and still can't fill the latent demand in the labor market, which is driving employers to think a little bit more openly about how to fill that. We're also seeing really interesting growth on our resource and education side in the amount of companies that are asking for education around inclusion and around accessibility. And we're finding that it's because companies are having to think about they're having to think out of the box a little bit about how they used to typically recruit or support their existing staff. And that brings us, I think, full circle to the conversation today about tech, which what we're seeing is that employers are much more open, I would say, today, or the majority of employers are much more open to conversations about what technological accommodations or supports could look like in the workplace and what an adapted workplace could look like. Because when we think about it, what the pandemic did was basically leapfrogged us 7 to 10 years in terms of tech adoption. So a lot of those conversations it was a quantum leap in terms of what people are thinking about and how they're framing those things. And we're seeing the diversity of support requests that come through our organization growing. So the menu is much less restrictive and I'll say prescriptive than it was before. And the diversity of requests, like you were alluding to, David, more requests for small technological support solutions or other things that are out of the box, but still really important, interesting technological solutions.
And what I always found, Brian, historically, was that employers were quite scared that if they opened that box up, they were going to be presented with a huge bill for assistive technologies or new technologies that they had no experience of. And have you found that that's still a concern for people, and is it a realistic concern?
Yeah, I think actually what we found from talking, so we have essentially facilitators in 30 communities across the country, and the number one piece of feedback we often get from employers or question is, okay, if I'm talking accommodations, what kind of cost am I talking? And part of what we do is sort of demystify that and make it a part of their business case. And I know ODEN and other organizations do this as well. We build a real sort of business case around inclusive employment and accessible employment by showing that the typical accommodation is about actually, the typical accommodation doesn't cost anything. In fact, most of the time it's driven by support agencies or by third parties that your individual employee would be accessing. But in the rare event that you do have to tap into funds, the typical cost, and there's long-term surveys that have shown this in the US, going back to like 2004, typical cost is it's under $500 for an accommodation. So it's definitely still part of the conversation, to answer the question directly. And I think we'd be naive and a little bit Pollyanna-ish to say that it's not. But I do think that we're seeing a bit of a transformation, and that people are less concerned about having to do accommodations and much more concerned about the mechanics of how to do them now.
Ingrid, do you want to add something? It's an interesting.
Yeah. Thank you, David, and thank you, Brian. I was going to say, I come from the private sector. I'm an engineer by trade. And in the private sector, we don't think twice about providing tools to engineers to design the things that they need to design. And so I think if we start the conversation from that perspective, that operationally, a business is better off by providing the tools that their employees need in order to be successful. Brian points out quite well to the fact that most accommodations don't cost anything at all. And on average, when there is a cost, is in the range of $500. And we all at this table have all that data. But I think if we start having conversations with businesses that bring them back to the operational systems, operationally, engineers need tools to design bridges. Operationally, manufacturing facilities need their software in order for their machines to work. Operationally, employees who have a disability need a set of tools to be successful. And that's some of the conversations where ODEN, has had that ability to turn it from a compliance perspective, from that regulatory framework, to one of your organizational culture changing because you're becoming accessible. Because culture change, organization culture touches everything about what you do as a business. It's the values of your employees and how they treat each other. It's about the processes and the procedures that are implemented both internally and externally so that you're serving your customers. It's about the standards by which you're practicing whatever it is that your business is in business to do so. So I think, when we talk about compliance, that's a very standard minimum that most businesses are looking to go by. And I think there is a will in the business community to go well beyond that, because of the fact that when you do provide people with the tools they need, they're successful, whether they have a disability or not.
That's great. And I think it's really interesting to me over many, many years of helping employers to understand that they've already paid for things in the technology they provide for every employee. They've got text to speech that will read out everything on the screen built into the device. They've got voice recognition to dictate what your reports and your essays built into the technology. You've got spelling checkers, grammar checkers. These are all things that in the past we paid out money for as assistive technology. But we now just take them for granted that they're built into the devices that we all own, EdTech, productivity tools, or consumer technologies. And I just want to turn to Dorothy for a moment, if I can. And Dorothy, how have you seen the wide range of employers and organizations that you work with respond to this increased use of technology to support people with disabilities?
I'd kind of echo Brian and Ingrid's comments, really, that I think there is a sea change in culture. It's maybe not as quick as we'd all like, but it's heading in the right direction. And I think they are recognising that technology, as you say, there's a lot that's already available, and they're not seeing it in silos of this piece of technology is the only one that's going to support that person. In fact, we, brain in hand, our specialists look at what the person, exactly as you've said, has already got on their phone. So I think people are seeing it as it's moving from a kind of cost to my business element to a real, actually, this is supporting my business to thrive. And I think we're getting increasing reports of that from people like Deloitte that are doing the reverse and putting out reports out there saying, well, if you don't do this, this is a cost of not doing it. And I think that messaging is really dripping down actually to employers. And we really are seeing our discussions are taking place. Yes, they're taking place with those responsible from HR and disability adjustments, but we are increasingly seeing at our webinars that we do, people who are in charge of what you may call people culture, the whole kind of holistic thing of how you support all of your employees. And I think that technology discussion is now moving from that. So it's moving away from strictly discrete one task-based piece of equipment to enable to how does this fit in within our whole plan to support. And as you say, it can be the whole workforce.
One of my least favorite words in the entire world is holistic. But I'm going to use it now and mention holistic. One of the things that I've also found quite interesting in trends more recently is historically we thought, okay, we will provide assistive technology and then we won't need to provide as much human support. But perhaps as a result of the pandemic and other things that have changed, more working from home and so on, we're both seeing, yes, that does mean that some forms of human support, scribes at university, are less needed because we can dictate. But also the technology itself links the user to other services and mediates between them. And I think, Dorothy, Brain in Hand is quite a good example of this in terms of that relationship between technology and human support. Is that right?
Yeah, I guess it's kind of, I mean, you describe it, I hope hybrid isn't one of your other words that you dislike, because it is a hybrid digital human support. So definitely there are lots of other things out there which are in app form, which support people to self-manage. I think we started off at University of Exeter. We developed from there, from the Innovation Centre, from a project to look into how people who were autistic could be supported to self-manage better with a distinct cohort. And I think the thing is that it's that blend at the beginning. Specialists work with people. We don't tell people what to do. We kind of elicit what their challenges are, what they may want to do. We've got the technology bit in the middle, and we've also got that kind of wraparound response, a response service at the end. So it definitely is different, and there are more hybrid products like that and support emerging definitely than just here's an app and away you go.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because maybe historically we've spoken a lot about quite large companies, large organizations, and the implementation of assistive and accessible technologies within them. And they've obviously got quite a lot of resource they can call upon to help with that. I've always been quite interested in how we support small and medium-sized enterprises, as well as large corporates. And it becomes increasingly important that regardless of size of the business, that they are both digitally literate in the broadest sense, also knowledgeable about the range of technology tools and exploring all the different options that can be put in place, provide accommodation to anybody in the workforce. And that then I think links up to Ingrid's point about the open culture of inclusion and support. But what I think is quite interesting then, I'd be interested to just talk a little bit about how technology, including the ones that you offer, supports both employers and organizations to become more accessible, as well as having a direct impact on the lives of people with disabilities right through those journeys they take. And perhaps Ingrid, maybe you could start us off here and just let's just think a little bit about how technology and digital literacy in technology works when we start to think about things like recruitment and job searching and actually applying for posts in the first place.
Yeah, thank you, David. I have a very tangible example. You know, in a particular community, we were looking to engage the deaf community to be part of a hiring initiative by a business that was very intentional in hiring from that demographic. And through our conversations, we realized that that the posting that they were providing was not inclusive. It was not accessible, whether it was the high level of English literacy that was included in the posting. The posting had language that did not apply specifically to the application to the job. So through plain language and ASL interpretation, we were able to engage the deaf community in a significant and intentional way. And it was really interesting for the business to understand that they can be doing that now, regardless of whether they are attached to a service agency or not, and broadcasting to a large population. I think it's 500 or 350,000 Canadians who live with hearing, hard of hearing or deafness. They could be broadcasting already through their career page the fact that they want to be an inclusive employer. So that's an example of how technology, we are actually using it right now, is making this conversation more accessible. Another type of technology, are you still hearing me okay?
Oh, yep, absolutely fine. Please keep going.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's just that I saw the interpreter has frozen. So I thought it was me.
I don't think that's your fault.
I'm so very sorry. All right, awesome. I'm glad that I caught that.
Thank you, Danica.
Yeah, and the other thing that I was going to mention, you know, from a recruitment perspective, Jobsability Canada, which is a product that ODEN has brought from the US, is now connecting job seekers who have a disability to business who are intentional in connecting directly to the disability community. And through the AI technology in Jobsability, these unintended barriers that we typically find in other platforms are removed because the AI is being intentionally done to be inclusive of people who do not have work experience, who do not have access to co-op or other types of environments where the foundational employable skills have been built. And so Jobsability is providing that connection through AI for job seekers who have the talents and the skills, whether it was through volunteering or simple things at home, to be considered as part of that hiring talent pool that businesses are looking to connect to.
I think it's really interesting that you speak a little bit there about AI. There's been a lot of bad press around the use of AI in recruitment and human resources more broadly. what it tells us is what we've always known: well-designed technology can be inclusive and should be and will be inclusive. Badly designed technology, not so much. I think the work of people like Jutta Treviranus at OCAD has been really important in helping people design what she refers to as the outliers, the people who are outside the main body of recruitment, but whose needs are absolutely critical to be included. So I think this is really interesting. Robin, would you add anything to that discussion around recruitment, job searching, and application?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm from a company called Fit First Technologies. We have a behavioral assessment. And what we do is we try to talk to the employer. So we get all of our job seekers to take this assessment. And what that tool does is then it gives them a fit score against the job. So if an employer is looking at hiring someone with a disability, and I'll just tell a story about Frank. So Frank, we did a pilot project, and Frank, with the workforce development, a job agency, and we needed to place Frank. And Frank had some mental health challenges. So his resume, he was actually very highly educated, but his resume had huge holes in it when he was dealing with his mental health crisis. So he completed our assessment and he found a job, and we went to the employer, and our feedback from that conversation was incredible. And because what the employer said was, normally these agencies come in and they say, okay, here's Frank. And the person interviewing is thinking in the back of their head, okay, what's wrong with Frank? What do we have to do to get Frank employed here? But because he took this assessment and because he had this report through technology, it's an online assessment, Frank went in and it showed that he was a 98% fit for this job. The employer had all that information. And what that did was it changed the conversation. So now Frank knows that this person is going to be a good fit with my team. He's going to be a good fit with the job. He's going to be a good fit with me. He's not thinking, okay, what do we have to change to employ Frank? Is like, look at what Frank is bringing to our team. And just through this one little piece of tech, we completely changed the conversation around Frank. And Frank, is still there. And I think that was like 7-8 years ago. He's still a happy employer. And had we not had that information, if the employer had just gone off of that resume, they would see someone who didn't have a very good work history, that had just, years where he wasn't employed. And so technology, when done correctly, can open doors and just completely change the conversation between employers and their job seekers.
And Rami, Andrea has just asked a question, which I think is a good one, because in my ignorance, what is the fit assessment? How does it work?
It was built by a psychologist, so it's a behavioral fit assessment. It's the same for everyone. It does not weed out disabilities. What it is it places people in a bell curve. So we have 25 traits. And then we find that most people fall within, these middle traits, these 4 to 7. It's the things that we're outside of everyone, no matter who, they have traits in their personality or their behaviors that make them different. And if you find a team where all those traits, complement each other, then it's a better fit. And so one of my bosses, one of our traits of sociability is how much we talk. And so he is very, very high social. And he realized that if he brought into the office, when we were in the office at that time, if he brought in other high social people, nothing would get done because we would sit there and we would chat. So it's not about getting like people, it's getting people that complement each other. And so what he did is he got a lot of low social people. So when he talked too much, we would be like, okay, it's time to work. And so it's just about finding, I guess, the fit for both job, team, and manager, which is what we're all looking for, right, at the end of the day.
And Ingrid, we've got another question there, which is I think is also quite interesting. How does the artificial intelligence, the AI analysis work with the job descriptions as they're brought through for you?
So it's interesting. You were talking earlier about the fact that technology doesn't mean that the human aspect disappears. So when job stability is connected to a business, the AI would harvest or will go through the HR career age of a business. And so that's automatically done from a perspective of technology. Where the human aspect comes in is that Jobsability, as well as the team at ODEN, can work with the business to identify where their postings are creating unintentional barriers, and even to the fact that there is an ableist, the possibility for ableist language or processes that are unintentionally keeping people out of the work. So we can provide that functionality, that human connection from the AI of the technology working with the job seeker. Sue Defo, who is the person who runs the Jobsability team, is also on the call, and she can provide a much in-depth conversation. But she often uses the analogy of a bucket. If that person is building a profile, so we don't use, you don't upload resumes, you actually create a profile. And as you're building that profile through 17 categories, I believe is what we do, that person can begin to create a profile based on those 17 categories. And their experiences, their education, their skills, their desires and passions can then be part of that profile in that bucket that we're beginning to fill. And as that profile is created, the AI begins to create matches with job postings as they're being pulled up from the Jobsability, from that harvesting of recruiting pages. The matches begin to be provided to the right-hand side of the job seeker's profile, and then that job seeker is able to then identify if that is a job that they want to go and apply for. There is also an opportunity for that job seeker, if they have an employment service provider who is providing employment supports, for that person, that third person, to have access to the profile with consent from the job seeker, so that then there is an opportunity yet again for more human support to be provided to the job seeker to understand that that is a job that maybe you're qualified to do. And let's talk about how you should be applying and how you can apply for it.
And I think it's interesting. I can remember 20 years ago looking at a job description for somebody who needed to work in the field and needed to go out to work in the or different providing support services for clients in their workspace. And on the job description, it said ability to drive is essential. And of course, actually, it wasn't. What was essential was the ability to travel, the ability to go to visit the locations. And I can remember very early on talking to a blind guy who had applied for this post and was very well qualified. And he said, I don't need to drive. My wife drives me. We always have done it like that. She goes and does what she does while I'm doing the work. And of course, then later on, that changed actually there was funding to pay for somebody to be your driver if you needed to go and work out in the field. That was done in the UK, and there was funding for what we called access to work. So yeah, the job descriptions are important, and those essential and desirable skills are often weighted in a way that creates unintended barriers. But of course, that's only the start of the process in terms of going into work. As we know, getting our job might be a huge barrier, but what's coming next is going to be quite challenging as well. And I wonder, Dorothy, I mean, you have this area really where you're working in, where we're really trying to transition from recruitment and initiation, induction into ongoing support. And how do you find that technology supports that shift to ongoing support?
It's really interesting that you picked up on travel as, in that case, being raised as a barrier, because one of the big things that Brain in Hand is used for is to support travel strategies where people may have mental health or anxiety issues. So again, it's not about separating the human from the digital support, but it's about building those strategies. And we've got a number of ex-travel coaches that work for us, so they work with a person programming that, and that for some people, that being able to travel anywhere is the first barrier to getting a job, particularly if it's a location that they do have to enter. We look at, because it is personalized, because the data is that person's data, we can look at then about using the data to build a personalized template. So looking at how they've used it, looking at the days and tasks that have been challenging, looking at the timeline, which comes as part of Brain in Hands technology, looking at that and really, really personalising it down and ideally to work with managers. And I think that's a conversation that we've not really had on here yet. We've had the broad conversation with about employers, but actually the direct line manager of a person and the crucial role they play in an early conversation. So we do a lot of that. We use the technology to support people with repetitive tasks, for reinforcing tasks, for memory issues, for habituation, really, but the bespoke, the human side of it, their specialist support comes in, and really that's optimized when the manager or the line manager understands that as well, and understands the need to support somebody and to monitor. One of the things that comes up quite regularly in the UK is an assessor will do an assessment of somebody, but particularly if somebody has a variable condition and may have peaks and troughs, not necessarily reviewing that. So 4 years down the line, they may be assessed in the same way when actually they've now got issues at work and that needs reviewing. So I think for us, there's something about, it's not just a question of assessing somebody once and saying these are the accommodations that you need, but actually it's part of an ongoing conversation as well with the employer, with the assessor, and from our point of view, with Brain in Hand. Transitioning, we look at transitioning into work. We do support a lot of people on programs with FedCap, which I think is a North American company anyway, that works with the Department of Work and Pension. We've just done a really successful pilot with them, with a small cohort, supporting people on a year-long program for work readiness and then into work. We really, I suppose, strong in universities and transitioning into university. One of the things we're looking at is transitioning out to work, given the figures for students with disability actually getting jobs. But the UK government, that is raising up the agenda, and we do now have a Department of Work and Pensions access to work funding, which David mentioned, which is what the funding pot that supports adjustments here. They're piloting, it's not quite there yet, a passport from study into work. So it's a really busy landscape at the moment, that whole transition picture.
And let's get into this issue of real practicalities. How do we make these accommodations happen in the workplace? And I think sometimes because we're so passionate about assistive technology, about accessibility and about inclusion, sometimes as professionals, we don't really understand the needs of the employer, the business within which this is going to be based. I'll give you an example. I was working with a very small company, and it was a restaurant, and they'd been sent a document saying how they could accommodate a person with the needs, so a person with autistic needs, absolutely on the continuum. And they had somebody apply. And then the manager spoke to me and he said, owner said, you need to understand one thing. So here's this guidance. And it talks about your HR team. It talks about your occupational health. It talks about your IT team. He said, I am all of those, and I have to keep this business afloat. Everybody else who works for me cooks food and gives it to people. That's what everyone else does. And I thought that was really interesting, that everything we're doing, we need to recognize the environment within which we're incorporating. But you can take that right through. So I was with a big bank in Europe about 4 weeks ago, and they said every assistive technology that people recommend has to be tested and trialed to ensure that in no way it places our security of data at risk. Any assistive technology that is cloud-based would put us at risk, and it would be illegal for us to do that. So understanding our employers, understanding the businesses. And Brian, I want to turn to you on this one, Brian, if I can. How do we work with employers and businesses to prepare them, to ready them for bringing assistive technology and anticipating needs in the workplace?
Yeah, it's going to sound like a bit of a platitude again, but maybe we can use this as a jumping off point. But I think it does come back to Ingrid's point about creating that sort of culture of accommodation, and I think that a lot of the conversations that we're having with employers are preparatory ones to sort of ready them for the possibilities of various types of accommodations. And those can be really far-ranging conversations sometimes, but allowing the employer to like really get in the weeds on like the questions around like data security. We've worked with even organizations like CSIS in Canada, which, they're very concerned about security and trying to figure out how people are going to be vetted through the civil service, how, if there's various like processes and accommodations that need to be implemented, but not shying away from those conversations. And again, I know it sounds like a bit of a platitude, but it's allowing the employer, and I'm talking in this case big employers, but I think small employers are actually at an advantage in some respects, because in a lot of cases, you may be an army of, I'll speak to that as well. You may be an army of one in that you have to do your own HR, your own diversity, equity, inclusion, everything. You're the bookkeeper too. But the advantage of that is that you get an intimacy and understanding of the upfront conversations, and you get to lead the sort of the move as a leader towards a sort of culture of accommodation. And then you actually get to maybe be involved in directly supporting a person as well in some capacity as an employer as they work through those accommodations. But with bigger organizations, it definitely, I always use the metaphor of it's a cruise ship, right? This idea that we're going to turn it on a dime is not always how it works. It takes time to sort of move these large bureaucratic machines around. And we're in a luxurious position in that we get to sort of play the long game with some of these employers, but those preparatory conversations are the starting point, so that when they start to bring people in through an active recruitment process, they're ready and they're not scrambling to adapt the workplace to meet those accommodation needs. Instead, we've done the preparation up front.
And I think this is a really good point. And one of the points that I want to make at this point is you're right. It sounds a little bit of a platitude to say you've got to change the culture. And it's one of those things you think, yeah, okay, what does that mean? But at the heart of that for me is the principle of anticipation. Actually thinking we are going to, at some point, have people with different needs coming into our workplace. It could be somebody who's deaf, somebody with visual impairment, it could be somebody on the autistic spectrum, so on and so on. I want to include them. So whilst let me think about that in advance. So if I'm buying different things that are going to be used in my workplace, let me make sure that they're designed to be accessible.
Yeah.
If I'm going to have a CMS system for tracking customers, let's make sure it will work with a screen reader for people who are blind, and so on. So we're not saying we've got those people yet, but we're anticipating. I think that's at the heart of shifting that culture from being responsive because somebody has applied to being ready for when somebody applies. And I think that's really important. And maybe, Ingrid, maybe you could just touch upon something from that. Recognizing all of those assistive technology trends, and you mentioned artificial intelligence earlier. From your point of view and the point of people working with ODEN, what are some of the broad assistive technology trends that you've seen in the workplace when it comes to giving that support to employees and anticipating and delivering that support in reality?
Yeah, I was going to say, the assistive technology is the number of assistive technologies out there are just as diverse as people. And I think that before I get into what we have seen in the field, I think it's we need to remember that about 53% of the population or more are impacted by disability. So I think it's this whole concept of normalizing accommodations throughout the life cycle of a person. Children have accommodations in the educational system, albeit not always as full as they need, but they are accommodated in the educational system to be included. So if we normalize that just continues through as they transition to work, we need to normalize that fact that students are coming out of post-secondary schools with accommodations to be successful. Then they should have that in the workplace. And just another point that I want to make, there is data out there that says that 70% of employers, when surveyed, did not know the extent of talent that people who have a disability have. And 40% do not access employment service providers in their community because they don't know that those supports exist. So there's still a little bit of awareness that we need to do to make sure that communities recognize that supports do exist for employers who may have limited bandwidth or limited resources to access accommodations for employees who have a disability. Now, in terms of the assistive technologies that we have seen out there, ASL interpretation for employees who are deaf, that allows them to access postings in a more accessible way. Simple things like allowing, from, as you said, the opportunity for people to have screen readers, text to voice. Just to give you an example, there was a young lady that was being supported to enter the workforce with a particular service provider. For her, having things written was an issue. So what was the accommodation? The supervisor at the beginning of each day would send a list over email, like over the phone, for her to listen to. So she was having a really hard time reading, but if she had that message that she could go back over and over to listen to what the tasks for the day were, that was her way of ensuring that she was accommodated and that she was successful in the workplace. On the opposite side, in a business where the supervisor had to leave often, one of the accommodations was to have a checklist for a young man who had a learning disability so that he could go through the list ensuring that he had done his task for the day. That was so successful that the supervisor implemented that for all of the other mechanics working in that particular facility because they were having a hard time trying to get through their day when the supervisor was gone. So just, circle back on the whole concept that accessibility and the things that we do to accommodate people who have a disability impact all of us.
Absolutely. And I think we are seeing new types of technology beginning to be introduced. We're seeing things like augmented reality and virtual reality for training so that you can practice same skills. Things like wayfinding, where routes around buildings or from building to building, you can follow that on augmented reality rather than a map. If a map is difficult, just follow the line by pointing your phone on it. And these, again, aren't designed specifically to address the needs of people with disabilities, but they have huge value for that group. So that concept of implementing inclusive technologies, I think, is also quite important because, as you say, it benefits all employees. And I wonder, Robin, maybe you can just touch upon putting this in place requires a little bit of forethought and perhaps policy and planning. And have you seen any really good examples of organizations creating that type of policy, guidelines and plans that would be helpful for people to know about?
Yeah, so I don't know. We're a pre-hired tool. So the policy, what I like about our product is that everyone goes through the same, so the hiring process does change when you use someone you're trying to hire inclusively. And it does that because you have to put everyone through kind of through the same process. So if you're doing the assessment, we're giving you like that fit score. Probably not the best one to talk about it, about policies and stuff. It's just not what we do.
But is that driven by compliance with law? So they come to you, or is it because they've taken a decision and put that into policy, if you like, as a company to say, you know what, we need to do something about this? Yeah,
and I don't know if it's the law, but right now it's just reality that there are not enough workers. So we do a lot of work with apprenticeships and trades, and so right now, and because there just are not enough people, so employers need
economic drivers.
Absolutely, and that's really the only thing that makes huge changes in business, right? And so right now there's just not enough people, and you have to look outside what you've always done, or you're just not going to survive in this environment. And Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it's great. And Dorothy, has that been the same for you in terms of that background, that policy, those decisions being taken by employers? Is that driven by compliance with legal obligations or by a more either economic or social imperative to make those changes? And have you got any examples of policies where you've seen that working effectively?
I think in the UK anyway, it's definitely a mixture of social and business need. I'd absolutely agree with you. There are huge issues, these staff shortages in across so many sectors. And that does really an advantage of that. A happy benefit is that you've got more employers now who are thinking more openly about things like supported internships. You've got lots of companies who are offering supported internships. For example, I can think of some that work with an organisation in the UK called Ambitious About Autism, where they're recognising that for some people with ADHD, they may need that really flexible working pattern, and actually they may work well between 8 and 2 in the morning. And there you can see in some of the job descriptions that are coming out that they're starting to really accommodate that.
And I think one of the things that is really interesting for me in terms of policy is where you're going to accommodate needs, people recognizing that the ways in which we traditionally accommodate needs are shifting and changing over time, that there's new technologies coming into place. And Brian, perhaps I could, just as a last point before we open this up to the floor, I'm interested from your point of view, are those emerging technologies making a difference now, or do we see that coming down in the near future?
Well, I think at an individual level, they're definitely making a difference. I think, especially, if we think about, I think both Ingrid and Dorothy have sort of mentioned that this is sort of the work course is a life course. And I think when people are developing a sense of what accommodations they need, if they're receiving them at, high school or post-secondary, they're often carrying a sort of self-awareness with them out into the workforce, where they can, hopefully they've also worked on self-advocacy and other pieces where they can carry a sense of what supports they need. So I think the answer is twofold. At an individual level, yes, the new technologies, especially with all of the sort of leaps and bounds that the individual can harness through smartphones and other stuff, that's making an immediate impact on people's lives, especially if they can insert that into the conversation about their supports. And often we see clients advocating even with their support agency saying, I need this thing, and rather than the support agency being the person that's driving the conversation about what supports are needed. But as far as the larger sort of structural conversation about employers waking up to what those individual sort of supports mean when they're scaled up into company adaptation, I think that, like I was saying earlier, that takes a little bit more time, but it is starting to work its way through. And I think the most stark example was the work from home conversation. And when we, like what I said earlier, we saw, I was talking to somebody who had been trying to push organizations over to Teams for years, and then the pandemic hit, and he told me that in 7 years, or in a year, they had 7 years of transformation. And we were talking to large firms. I think some of them on the line with at this workshop that we're saying, we need to figure out a way to move these processes and work from home and do all these things. So all of a sudden, all of these individual accommodations and adaptations found their sort of structural policy window, and they started to slide in to sort of meet the demands of the employers, and employers had to figure out how to scale that stuff up. So I think it's sort of a twofold answer. Is yes, it's obviously making a difference immediately, and there's real power at a local and individual level, but it's up to that sort of culture change. And I think what the pandemic, if I can, end on this thought, the pandemic really showed is that change is something that we can realize maybe in a way that we didn't think possible before. I think that the pandemic made us realize that 7 years of change in a year is actually possible, and that it is somewhat attitudinal and cultural.
Thanks very much, Brian. I'm going to want to open it up to the floor for anything you want to contribute in terms of resources, services, training workshops or anything that you're aware of or provide that helps us implement technology into the workplace? I'm going to just mention one last thing on emerging technology while you have a quick think. Every one of us is probably using artificial intelligence in meetings, online meetings every day. The automatically generated captions that Zoom, Teams, Skype offer are very, very widely used. And I have found so often my ability to get a human captioner at short notice for a short session is actually extremely difficult. And with nobody funding it necessarily, often very expensive. So whilst it's not perfect, it reflects a trend to using technology to make a key tool for employment, for inclusion in the workplace, more accessible. It's not the final stage on that journey yet, but it's a significant step in the right direction. So let's open that up to anybody who either wants to put their hand up and speak, or anyone who just wants to type into the chat window things that they have found useful and would like to mention to other people while we have the opportunity. What we may have is a lot of people who are thinking it's time for lunch. I can see a hand there. Ingrid.
I was just going to make a comment, David, on that comment that you made about closed captions. I was mentoring a young engineer who is deaf, and she was having a really hard time getting through interviews. Her accommodation was a simple accommodation requesting closed captions for Zoom. And so some of the people who were offering interviews would not change their platform from Teams to Zooms. And therefore, that was a barrier for her. So when we think about accommodations in the request, sometimes they're very subtle. Her email was, can I please have a Zoom meeting with closed captions? That was it. She was undisclosing that she was deaf. But time and time again, she kept on getting no answers to her requests. So, for us as employers or as educators, to keep that in mind, that an accommodation request may be coming very subtly and very softly spoken by that person, and then we should keep that in mind as well.
Yeah, and of course, over time things change. So in fact, now we're in a situation where all of those platforms have captions built in. And actually it's really interesting. I don't know how many of you get invited to webinars on a regular basis, but I'm guessing quite a lot. It was a great trick if you get invited to webinars and can't attend, which is to download them and play them back with captions at double speed. It is a lot faster to scan text for many of us. So a 60-minute seminar becomes a 30-minute one, and you just can scan through the text at double speed. Now that's a way in which a technology that was designed to make something accessible for people with hearing loss actually has a benefit to us all, and certainly me, because time is really precious. Andrea, did you want to add something to that point?
You know what, this may sound a little bit out there, but I was wondering, with this technology, as you talk about that, something that's not necessarily designed, I think accessibility, not around like a disability necessarily. Ingrid spoke a little bit to this, and Robin, about the fit technology. So from minorities having access to jobs and networks and stuff. Now, for typically, people post jobs on LinkedIn and the typical places that may or may not be reaching other demographics. Just a question of maybe how this technology, as you talked about the AI, and I love the fit technology that Robin spoke about, could facilitate, attracting underrepresented people to jobs, just like the AI analyze the jobs and present the barriers. I just wondered if that was an opportunity for this technology as well.
I mean, I would certainly add to that, the technology helps us deal with large amounts of data, large amounts of information. So the fact that it can do that rapidly means that we can actually very much encourage bringing new people into the workplace. And actually the new technology is often quite a lot cheaper than some of the traditional products as well. But I'm going to close this off just at this point, and I just wanted I don't know if you all remember Kellogg's cornflakes always used to have competitions on the back, and the last question was the tiebreaker, which was you had to finish a sentence in 12 words or less, and the best slogan was likely to come up as a winner. So I'm going to turn to our panelists and say, in 20 words or less, succinctness being a virtue, one thing that you would recommend to change that culture towards one of anticipation, accommodation, and inclusion, particularly picking up on Renata's point of view in universities, corporations, and across the diversity of employers and educators. Brian, 20 words or less.
Oh, David, you really put me on the spot.
I am a horrible person.
Good.
Brian.
I know. I'm just realizing the full extent of it. It's no, I think I would say that and for fear of sounding again like platitudes and cliches, but I would say that the anticipatory change in your culture starts with a champion. So be that champion, or find that champion and connect them into the network of people that are already making that change, or find that network and be that change.
Champion. Great answer. Dorothy.
I see potential, not the challenge. And I'm not going to use the mystic word because you don't like it. So allow people to bring their whole self to work.
Okay. On words people don't hate, I once worked with somebody who said you should never use workshops unless there is a lathe in the meeting. So yeah, we'll have our little things that we worry us. Robin.
I don't know. I would say that you should hire for fit. And when you hire for fit, then it removes barriers to people who are, to minorities and to people with disabilities, because it hire for fit and not the resume. So the resume is just a snapshot of what privilege you've had in your life. Yeah.
And Ingrid, you go last for us.
Yeah, normalize different, see ability, and presume competence.
Excellent. You win the prize for succinct 20 words or less response. I think that's a really good point at which to close our webinar off. There is so much there. I'm going to say, I can see, I think it's Aila mentioned there, inclusion begins with I. Yeah, great. But I'm going to say that as you get older, so many of the things that I recommended for 40 years, I now use day in and day out. So my advice has always been, if you want to be inclusive, be selfish, because one day you are going to need these accommodations. And that's where I would say. Boris, I'll just turn back to you if you'd like to just close everything off, and any final words.
Thank you, David. Thank you. That was exceptional. Thank you all. One part of my career was assistive learning technologist, so this was really exciting to listen to. On behalf of the CAN National Office, I'd like to sincerely thank Distinctability for organizing this panel. Thank you to David, to each of our panelists, Brian, Ingrid, Dorothy, and Robin. We truly appreciate you taking the time and sharing your expertise. Thank you everyone for your comments and questions. If anyone has any links to resources, please share them in the chat, and we will then share them with our networks. We're excited to announce the topic and date of our next CAN Connect Forum. It's taking place on Tuesday, November 8th from 12 noon to 1 p.m. A representative from the Rick Hansen Foundation will present on their accessibility certification course and training for measuring meaningful access in the built environment. We look forward to this topic and invite you all to register. Somebody should be posting a registration link for the next CAN Connect Forum in the chat. We'll also share a link to our feedback form. Please take the time. I never do, I admit, but it is important to hear feedback and which will help us improve these sessions. Thank you all again for attending today. If you have any questions or you would like to learn more about the Canadian Accessibility Network or get involved, please contact our national office. I assume there will be an email in the chat. I'm too busy reading the script, which I must not deviate from. We hope to see you all at our next CAN Connect forum. Thank you and have a great afternoon.